Why do you resist? The thought must have crossed your mind at some point. The fact that you've delved too deep. The thought that this would have been a one-way trip. So instead of fighting the inevitable, why not embrace it? Just lay down and rest, for there is beauty in this darkness. One that can be harnessed and used to usher in something new. Horror indie games have been through a lot these past couple of years, ever since the Big Brown Bear made its debut in 2014 and exploded into popularity. Now, almost every new horror game is trying to be the next Five Nights at Freddy's. Gone are the days of a full story inside a one complete package, the likes of House and Lily's Garden. Now, if you're making an indie horror game, you gotta have hidden lore, a million sequels, kids-friendly monsters, easy hand-holding bordering on non-existent gameplay, and you security breach / poppy playtime. And of course, a million lore hints to attract that ever so valuable game theory episode.
So I'm working with a charity who are dedicated to finding out if MatPat ever responded to the Hello Neighbor Twitter account.
But every now and then, a unique gem manages to slip through the cracks. An indie horror game that manages to be scary without relying on jump scares. A hard but fair challenge that's not at all scared of the player getting frustrated. And most importantly of all, a game that understands that the Easter eggs and hidden lore should be a bonus edition, not some required reading. A masterpiece by the name of Fear and Hunger.
Now, Jon Snow finally faces Jaime Lannister, and this guy's wiener is, huge, right? So it's not gonna be easy.
Have you ever thought what could happen if you made Getting Over It into a Lovecraftian horror game? Well, that's what was indie developer Happy Patek thought in 2018 when he decides to release his Berserk fanfiction to the world and make it everybody else's problem. At first glance, this game looks like baby's first RPG Maker game, but then you actually play it. Okay, first enemy should be easy enough, or not, apparently. A talk option, okay, I've played Undertale, I see where this is going. Or not, apparently. Okay, next enemy, what do we... Holy mother of Dende! What the fuck is that? Why is there a counter? Fear and Hunger is the embodiment of the main thing I love about indie games. Freedom. Freedom to not be rushed for an arbitrary release date. Freedom to not have to appeal to a chart of boxes. Freedom to tell whatever story you want, how you want it, and uncensored and unfiltered. And most importantly, the freedom to trust the player to figure out the details of your tightly written complete narrative. Let me repeat, a complete narrative that's planned from the start. One that gives you an incomplete puzzle and tells you to fill in the holes with the information you're given. Not one that tells you to wait for the sequel for a chance to learn the answer. Maybe, but one that gives you all the tools you need to solve it, with its sequel telling a completely different story in the same world. And it is that fascinating world that I want to discuss with you today, because I think that I might just have found the key that links everything together. But before discussing anything about what happens during the events of the game, we first have to get an understanding of the world our character inhabits, starting with the most important part of the world. For all intents and purposes, the gods in Fear and Hunger are divided into three groups: the old gods, the new gods, and possibly most importantly of them all, the ascended gods. The old gods are the most powerful and influential beings in Fear and Hunger. They are beings that embody a concept or a belief in the world, and their shape and power would change depending on what is thought of that belief and or concept, meaning that they could be completely different depending on the perspective from a person to person. They are so powerful that they cannot be fought, they cannot be comprehended, nor can they be directly interacted with without going completely insane. The only version of these gods that can be interacted with are the mere traces that are scattered around the dungeon's most horrid locations. You can only worship them and hope to gain their favor, blessing you with a fraction of their abilities. As of the content of the first game, we only get informed of 5 of the old gods, those being Krogaroth, god of death and destruction, Sylvian, goddess of love, lust, fertility and creation, their son Vanushka, god of nature, Rahar, the trickster god of the moon, and finally a being only known as the god of the depths. Of these 5 gods, we will only be talking about 3 of them, mostly because Rahar and Venushka don't play a role in the story until the sequel, Fear and Hunger Termina. Now, with that out of the way, introducing Gorgoroth, god of destruction. To give room for new generations, for new trees to grow and usher, the prior forest need to be burned down. Such is the role of creation. For creation and destruction, one does not exist without the other. The destruction is called Gorgoroth, the destroyer of man. A man fears destruction because a man gets accustomed to peace and quiet. The man grows fat and afraid of change. But change is inevitable, just as Gorgoroth. But there is no need for fear, as the destruction is of pure kind. It does not target one man specifically, it just exists. Something to note about Gorgoroth is that he is a curious god, more so than the other gods at least. To relieve the feeling of fear, Gorgoroth would wear bodies and skin of men and women alike. He even sometimes walks among men disguised masks under the skin of people and hang bodies. Those who are dedicated to the god of death gain his favor by sacrificing blood in his name within his praying circle. Some of Gorgoroth's worshippers include the Black Witch myth in the beginning of the game and the Yellow Mage subject of the Mad Wizard Nazraha. Gorgoroth blesses his followers with his blood magic, that being his gift for his followers. Those who follow his teaching get the ability to harness the dark magic, resurrect the dead, and bend the very blood inside their mortal skin. Such is the way of Gorgoroth. Sylvian. Oh, God damn it. Sylvian is the goddess of lust, love, fertility, and creation. She was the very creator of humanity at the dawn of time, and from the very first moment, she loved her children greatly. But over time, her love blossomed into a more obsessive form, and she will try to guide her children more and more. But alas, she realized that her children will never be able to return the same amount of affection back to her. So, her love took a more twisted form. Sylvian would shape mankind more to her liking and more into her own image, with her greatest teaching to mankind, that being her love magic, otherwise known as the flower magic. Just like Gorgoroth, you can attempt to gain Sylvian's favor by committing acts in her praying circle, but unlike her husband, she demands acts of physical intimacy in her name. But these acts can easily get out of hand, as for a brief moment in ancient history, mankind fell into a craze of fleshly delight, a synchronized mass sea of naked people in the middle of coitus would blast and waste their days. Some can even be seen during the events of the game, although interacting with them holds a heavy risk of losing one's mind to the eternal lust. There are still cults dedicated to Sylvian to this day, but many believe that she left mankind behind a long time ago. Of the 3 old gods encountered during the game, Gorgoroth and Sylvian are the most prominent. As Gorgoroth scholars like to say, there is no creation without destruction and no life without death. Their connection even goes past the metaphorical sense, evidenced by the existence of their son Venushka, the god of nature. Choosing the worship of any god will grant the player that god's favor, allowing them to hold a fragment of their power, be it Gorgoroth's blood magic or Sylvian's flower magic seen in the game and written in their studies. Depending on who you ask, God of the Depths is either the most important or least important god in Fear and Hunger, because on the one hand, he is the weakest of the old gods we meet during the events of the game, literally at his dying bed with the dungeon serving as his tomb. But on the other hand, his mere existence is what causes all of the dungeon's horror to occur. And the more you get closer to him, the more distorted and inhuman the dungeons become. God of the Depths encompasses the idea of revulsion, absolute darkness. Not much is known about this old one. No prominent cults, not that many books, and a weird pattern of everyone who worships him being a worthless creature in the grand scheme of things. While Gorgoroth and Sylvian stand worshipped by a good portion of the human population, God of the Depths is really shrouded in mystery, to the point where he's the only known god without a proper proper name, simply known as the God of the Depths, to the point where he's really only worshipped by rats, insects, and the likes. God of the Depths is worshipped by the Forsaken and the Forgotten, small beings that roam the darkness, monsters looking to become something more than their horrifying selves, or just simply creatures that went mad. Nevertheless, he is still an old god, and gaining his favor will bless you with his abilities. Mastery over insects to commune with the bugs, needle worms harnessing the strength of 100 leeches. The price of that, of course, is having to carry them inside you as parasites. Locust swarms, summoning a swarm of locusts. Damn, I swear I had something for this. Actually, I would like to hold out on talking on the new gods in this section, mainly because they become more relevant later on, so get to that when you get to that. Long ago, at the dawn of time, humanity was guided and taught by the old gods. They showed mankind how to act, how to live, and how to move forward. But over time, the old gods grew tired of mankind, for the old gods embodied a concept or a hard truth. They didn't need humanity's worship to exist, they just did. And the things they embodied would change depending on what humanity thought of them. Most notably, Venushka embodied nature itself, meaning that he would be interpreted differently depending on areas where his nature are most easier or harder to live with. This meant that for as long as there are two humans alive, humanity wouldn't have one single definition of the gods. Add to that, humanity were reckless, selfish, and flawed, while old gods were simply too pure for this world. And so, they decided to leave this plane of existence and mankind with it, leaving humanity in shambles and without guidance. And so, for centuries, men and women were stuck repeating the same mistakes over and over and over again. Something to note in here, while the old gods have left humanity long ago, they're not completely gone. Worshipping them still gains their favor, allowing the follower to use their magic, and some of their traces even hang around every now and then, like the trickster moon god Rahar. Or, in even rare cases, some of traces of Gragorath and Sylvian can still be seen to this day, but for all intents and purposes, they're gone. But then, something happened. A human, a mere human, managed to ascend to godhood. A human by the name of... On contrast to God of the Depths, we know almost everything about Olmer. He came from humble beginnings and was born to a virgin mother with the seed of a fall. Hey, give me a second. Virgin mother, 12 apostles, crucified in the cross. Hey, is this Richard? Okay. What? What is that? Olmer was born to a virgin mother, coming from the seeds of something called a false god. That, ladies and gentlemen, will be marking the first question mark in the board. The amazing thing about Fear and Hunger, that unlike my favorite punching bag, that being Security Breach, is that what's canon is not just a one-ending thing. The game, despite its size, is actually huge. Every part of the world will keep moving with the player. Every part of the world branches into puzzles to fit in the board. So here's how we're gonna be doing things. We are gonna be going through the timeline normally, combining the pieces of the puzzle, but knowing full well that we will not be able to see every piece, we are gonna be using the other pieces to determine the missing ones. So, while going through the timeline of events, we're going to be putting one of 3 question mark types if we encounter an oddity, or if the timeline started to branch. And these types are green marks, referring to simple questions that can be answered based on information we have, yellow marks, referring to branches in the timeline that we can deduce based on other confirmed branches, and finally, red marks, those referring to any time where I start putting my tinfoil hat on and start to speculate about less confirmed stuff. And so, we will be going through the timeline normally, putting marks on any oddities we encounter, and then after completing the timeline, we'll get back to the many marks that we've encountered with new information ready to complete a theorist's dream, a complete timeline. Also keep in mind that our use of Fear and Hunger Termina, that being the sequel to Fear and Hunger, will be limited. We'll only use it if an event in it confirms a branching path, it answered an unanswered question, or in one particular instant revealed the fate of one of the characters. Now that all the rules are out of the way, and without any further ado, we can start the timeline proper. We start the timeline at the dawn of time, with the old gods making mankind, of course, following them by abandoning mankind. Of course. Here we start with... Considering that the pre-calendar era was before, well, the calendar, we can't really precisely determine what happens when. But luckily, there is only one thing we have to talk about: the ascension of Allmer. After the old gods left, humanity were thrown into disarray. For centuries, mankind did not know what to do. That continued until Allmer came. Born to a virgin mother and an aforementioned false god, marking our first green mark to what a false god is, here we also see our first timeline branch, because the books we have on Allmer tell the story of two different ways of which he rose to power. But luckily both ways lead to Rome, and despite which virgin is revealed to be true, both of them have the same outcome. So it's business as usual. Allmer quickly grew in popularity, faster than any who have ever came before him. Through his teachings and techniques, he traveled around the East gathering 12 loyal apostles. But not everyone was fond of his influence, for corrupt kings and sultans all over the Eastern sanctuary began to take note of his popularity among the masses, mainly because of his ideal world united people under different religions and gods. And feeling threatened by his power, Allmer was arrested and brought before all these kings and was sentenced to death by crucifixion. His death, of course, marking the beginning of the calendar, year 0. But also something else, something that has never been done before. Through his pain and misery, Allmer, son of the false god, has ascended. He went to the city of the gods, Mahabara. Mahabara was like this living dream. Though the old gods were long gone by that point, some remnants of them still linger in the city. Time and space did not follow the same rules as we used to. The sun doesn't warm you, and death is not the same once you've walked these streets. Allmer has heard of what this ancient city once was, but since the older gods abandoned humanity, the place became empty, hollow, lingering only in the dreams and visions of some selected ones. Nevertheless, Allmer managed to reach that promised place, shedding his mortal body and gaining strength rivaling the old gods themselves. He eventually returned to his weeping apostles and gathered them together to carry out his plan to save humanity from the cruelty and tyranny of the kings and sultans. With his newfound strength as an ascended god, he killed those kings and sultans and brought forth the Old World Order, or the New World Order as they called it at the time. The Old World Order is the glorious era where Allmer united humanity with himself being the main center of worship around the time. In fact, still being the only relevant god around considering the state of the older gods, Allmer still is the most commonly worshipped deity in this day, and just like any other god, gaining his favor will grant you fast travel. Okay, that's cool. Turning moldy bread and water into bread and wine. Okay. And walk on water. Come on, that one is even subtle. And with that, we conclude the Old World Order era. Just putting 2 green marks in between year 0 and 809. Leading into... Going ahead in the timeline, specifically 809 years later, after Allmer established the New World Order, now referred to as the Old World Order, humanity once again started to struggle, trapped in an endless cycle of repeating the same mistakes over and over again. The great kingdoms of the world were slowly rotting away, and the grand values mankind once aimed for were replaced by defiled principles and practices. But there was still hope. 5 people saw hope. These people were known as the Fellowship. They were Francois, the Dominating One, Nelvana, the Endless One, Valtal, the Enlightened One, and Chambara, the Tormented One. And then there was the 5th one, she or he who never aspired for the same greatness as the rest of the party, one whose story bears no listeners, the Forgotten One. A person so mysterious, different tellings of the story disagree on their name or even their gender, but at the end of the day, they do not matter. For the Fellowship saw one goal in mind, one way to make a change. There existed an ancient tomb to the ancient city of Mahabara, one that worked as a hub for multiple different planes of existence, a place where a man could meet his maker. Those who would set their foot inside would end up in a forever going turmoil of godly dimensions and plane of afterlives. It is here that the Fellowship would demand the right to self-govern for mankind, the freedom to choose their own destiny and build the future they deserve. The Fellowship found their way to the ancient tomb that would lead them to their confrontation with the old gods. The Fellowship persisted through the numerous hazards and dangers the older gods threw their way. Eventually, all 5 of them would reach the Golden Gates of Mahabharata, the very same gates Ulmer ascended from 800 years prior. It seemed like the Fellowship had bested all the challenges the gods laid for them, but at the most crucial moment, a seed of doubt was planted into the mind of the 5th one. The Forgotten One was a scholar of many arts and science, and as such doubted what was laid before their eyes. The older gods would use this to their advantage and create a grand lie about the greater scheme of things. The grand lie told of the way the older gods directed the flow of mankind. Remember this? The great scheme of things? We will be coming back to it later. The Forgotten One believed that many had gone before the same trials as the Fellowship, yet nothing had changed for the betterment of mankind as eons went by. This suspicion created a drift between the Fellowship. In the end, the 4 other members proceeded with their initial mission, entrusting the fate and glory that was just inches away from them. The Fellowship tore down the legacy of the old gods, creating a new world order, an age where mankind decided their own fate, an age of growth and prosperity. The Fellowship became the new gods that we know and love today. Or at least, that's what they thought. The Forgotten One was never seen again. The 5th one simply disappeared in the dust of time, never to be heard from again. Something to note here about the Fellowship's titles: they're determined by the time of one's birth, and are indicators of how one's personality and life will be like, oftentimes being the source of one's personal skill. Soul types are the fear and hunger equivalent to real-life zodiac signs. Though birth signs are still mentioned and confirmed to exist, to normal humans they are but personality types. But when that same human ascends and becomes a new god, they are simplified into that type. Of course, not all new gods titles are determined by their signs, but for some reason the Fellowships are. Alright, by now we've reached the present time, with the most important character in the Fear and Hunger, Griffith, Lagarde. In order to reach greater heights, to unify the lands, to bring upon the new era, I need this power. The strength of kings and queens is not enough. I need more. Something that lasts behind me. Do you think any of the grand kingdoms history speak of stand on pure foundations? They were all built on bloodshed and violence. But what if there was a way that wouldn't require thousands of soldiers on opposing sides shredding their lives? What if such a grand kingdom only required one soul to succumb to the darkness? Only one soul to be tainted? Sometimes around the 1600s, let me just put a green mark on the specific date right here, a certain prophecy started to arise. A prophecy about a man destined for greatness, not to become a measly warrior or king, but a god. One who can rival the older gods in beauty and in brutality. That man's name was Lagarde. There were many tales written and sung about Lagarde's life even before his surge of popularity, and what made his rising to power even more peculiar is that Lagarde was a mere peasant in his start, simply a man of the common folk. It's not exactly known where the prophecy got started or if it was even true, but nevertheless, Lagarde's intelligence, combat capabilities, and charm were remarkable, sometimes bordering on mythical. He carved a name to himself, leading his crew, the Band of the Hawks, the Band of the Midnight Sun. Lagarde was always the curious type. Everyone knew that there was definitely something different about him, and even though he didn't give much thought to this weird prophecy at the start, the more battles he won, the more his accomplishments grew. Bit by bit, he was starting to believe that he was something else, and to be honest, who could blame him? The man's prowess was unbelievable, to the point where word of his achievement would reach the kings and queens of Rondon, making an even bigger name for himself. But despite how impressed they were with him, they were also wary of what he might become. Lagarde was of ordinary origins, a rising hero among the common folk. In their eyes, he was nothing but a threat to their own power. But at least for the time being, all they could do was bide their time. But luckily for them, they wouldn't have to wait for long, for Lagarde's ambition were getting too big to contain. He wanted to unify humanity under one fair kingdom, but as history would prove it, this goal can't be done by the order of a golden staff, but by the power of a dozen pitchforks. But even if he had managed to accomplish that, he knew that order, peace and tranquility don't last. He needed something definitive, something pure. He needed to ascend above the kings and queen of their time. He knew that the answer wasn't shrouded in mist, but waiting in the depth of the darkness. From then on, Lagarde's actions became more extreme, and there were one item he needed to accomplish his goal: the Cube of the Depths, the very key needed to unlock the passage to the City of the Gods, Mahabara, and nothing would get in the way of Lagarde's mission. Not even an innocent little village located in Oldgard. Lagarde would attack Oldgard. There, the band of the Midnight Sun would pillage, destroy, kill all who stand in their way. But what is a small massacre in the face of greatness? Lagarde would acquire the Cube of the Depths, but their action weren't free of consequence. For the higher-ups of Rondon would hear of this, using the news of Lagarde's little genocide to turn the common people against Lagarde and his band, and finally ordering an arrest for their crimes. Following the subsequent order, Lagarde and his crew would stand in a long fight against the Rondon army. But of course, outnumbered and outmatched, Lagarde would be arrested and the entirety of the band would be killed in battle, leaving only one surviving member. And then Lagarde would be sent to the infamous dungeons of fear and hunger, but he was not to be executed, for an unknown priestess ordered for him to be kept alive in the deepest part of the dungeon, while the torturers of the dungeon see the limits of his flesh. Just putting a small red mark here for the unknown priestess, and by that we can finally start rerouting the events of the game. Okay, and we're only 26 minutes in. God, this is what I just do with my life. Before we continue, please don't forget to subscribe. This whole video took the past 3 months with the reset, scripting and editing, so your like and sub are about the only cancellation here. And now, without any further ado, the timeline branch. The timeline will start with 4 different paths that we could follow. Those of course being Anki, the Dark Priest, Holder of the Enlightened Soul, also known as the Game Resident Introvert, Ragnvalder, Holder of the Tormented Soul, our very own Barbarian, Darce, the Knight and Holder of the Dominating Soul, also as soon we'll find out, a giant pain in my ass, and finally Kahara, the Mercenary, Holder of the Endless Soul, or in other words, the odd ones out. And as spoiler alert, the key to solving this whole thing, but I'm getting ahead of myself. To those of you who are paying attention, you might have realized that our 4 characters share the exact same soul types as the Fellowship. Both Anki and Valtal on the Enlightened Soul, Chambara shares the Tormented Soul with Ragnvalder, Darce and Francois both have the Dominating Soul, Kahara shares the Endless Soul with Nalvana. Now, while yes, soul types are not exclusive, for they are determined by your date of birth and not much else, it is an interesting correlation. Or maybe it might just be fate repeating itself once more. Who knows? Each of our heroes, for the lack of a better term, have their own motivation and reason for entering dungeons. In fact, they all arrive at different times during the game, and picking one of them won't erase the others, but will have you meeting them as NPCs during your playthrough. But they all have one thing in common: all their reasons for entering the dungeons relate in one way to another to Lagarde, Darce Catalyst, the trusted knight of the prophesied one himself. Lagarde. She seems awfully dim standing next to the blinding shimmer of that one, but it might just be wrong to misjudge her potential so easily. Born with the soul of the dominating that makes people around her bend to her will, well, kinda, Darce was a natural leader, but often ends up blinded to self-criticism. Her birth sign and wealthy noble background from the kingdom of Rondon already marked her for greatness, and she further cemented her worth by becoming a gifted holy knight of Allmare, and a valuable asset to her kingdom, much like her ancestors. Despite the harsh training that the squirehood demanded, Darce persevered and proved herself to be a formidable warrior, regardless of her noble origins. However, as she grew older, her devotion to Rondon began to falter, when she realized that the kingdom's pursuit of power was benefiting only the elite and the nobility. As a result, she made the difficult decision to leave the army, seeking a new purpose. Darcy would come to know the Knights of the Midnight Sun, a band of mercenaries led by the one and only Lagarde, who shared her exact same disdain for Rondon's action. Darcy observed that Lagarde's leadership success came from his visionary outlook of a united kingdom achieved through non-violent means, and his ability to connect with the common people, having originated from humble beginnings himself. That made him a natural leader that people could relate to. Recognizing Darcy's potential, Lagarde warmly convinced her to join the band, almost seducing her with his persuasive skills. It was during her time with the group that she fell deeply in love with Lagarde, despite only being seen as a valuable subordinate by him. The Knights of the Midnight Sun would eventually grow and attract the attention of Rondon, as we have previously stated. Initially as warriors available for hire, they eventually became a force to be dealt with for being a possible threat to their region. Darcy keenly observed as Lagarde's personal development mirrored the growth of his army. He became reclusive, dedicating his time to ancient texts and the occult. His fixation on relics and artifacts eventually drove him to invade Oldgard in search of the aforementioned Cube of the Depths. Darcy couldn't fully comprehend the reason behind this expanding campaign, as it seems to have the potential to negatively impact their reputation. And of course, her observation would end up proven to be correct, as Lagarde's willingness to employ violence and kill those who opposed him in his pursuit of the relic provided Rondon with the justification it needed to turn public opinion against Lagarde and have him arrested. Despite being a skilled fighter capable of leading both defensive and offensive maneuvers, Darcy was unable to prevent the Knights of the Midnight Sun from being defeated by Rondon's forces. Nevertheless, she managed to escape with her life standing as the only surviving member of the Band of the Midnight Sun. But she was not to give up. Fueled by loyalty and love, Darcy would head to the dreaded dungeons of fear and hunger. She had one goal in mind: rescuing the only man she ever loved. Save Lagarde. Ragnvalder. An intimidating figure for sure. Seems like even a northern brute like himself can appreciate fineness and knowledge. Born with the soul of the tormented, he was destined to face relentless struggle at every step of his life. However, this very burden became the force that shaped his physical strength and unraveled his iron will, akin to that of the gods themselves. In his early years, Ragnvalder enjoyed a balanced childhood in the kingdoms of Oldgard. Blessed with the presence of both his parents, it was his father who imparted upon him the art of war, nurturing his martial prowess and preparing him for the challenges ahead. As time passed, the winters in the north grew colder and the summers became shorter, plunging the land into a state of deep hunger. In the face of this plight, a grown Ragnvalder alongside other brave men from Oldgard embarked on a treacherous journey westward in search of sustenance and riches to elevate the suffering of their people. The sea stretched endlessly before them, and the horrors of the expedition took its toll on every weary crew. As time went by without food or water, the crew became more desperate. Some even resolved to cannibalize their dead crewmates, but amidst the gloom, their perseverance led them to the uncharted shores of Vinland, a dark and untamed continent steeped in the shadows of the ancient deities and unfamiliar gods that Ragnvalder had never heard of. But through the hardship, Ragnvalder survived, helping bring back the ancient item, the Cube of the Depths. This experience hardened him, teaching him some of the skills he would later need to survive. But in the end, all of that would be for nothing, for during a hunting expedition, Ragnvalder would return to his village only to bear witness to his worst fears materializing before his eyes. The Knights of the Midnight Sun invaded Oldgard to take the Cube of the Depths, killing many members of Ragnvalder's tribe in the process. This included Ragnvalder's wife and child, Hilda and Bjorn. Now, with a heart full of anger and a desire for vengeance, Ragnvalder embarked on a quest to the dungeons of fear and hunger in order to take back the Cube of the Depths and exact revenge on the army's captain. For all the pain his people have suffered during the invasion, he had one goal in mind: kill Lagarde. Anki, one of the more notorious dark priests of the modern age, we would not be surprised if he was to rise and become the new enlightened one. Anki was born with the soul of the enlightened, driving him to endlessly pursue new knowledge and uncover secrets beyond the reach of the ordinary. The fact that Anki and his twin sister were born to a lineage that had generation-long connection with the occult only cemented his connection to the enlightened soul. Anki's innate desire for knowledge became even more apparent at a young age when he was selected to become a dark priest. In keeping with the customs of the occult ceremony, Anki was compelled to engage in a deadly confrontation with his own sister, wielding ceremonial knives in a fight to the death. Though Anki's fragile physique proved to be his downfall, as his sister swiftly gained the upper hand and held a blade to his throat, poised for the final strike. However, she chose to spare his life and lower her weapon, stepping back from him while their supervising high priest looked on with perverse satisfaction. Anki's pilgrimage to become a dark priest led him to a solitary quest of discovery, traveling the western continent to study the occult, arts, diverse deities, blood magic, and a multitude of science. His impressive achievements were recognized by the foremost scholars of his era, and he was granted entry to the prestige Great Library of Rondon, renowned for their vast collection of historical and scientific knowledge. During his time at Rondon, Anki would immerse himself in his studies and acquire a great amount of knowledge. However, he would end up becoming unsatisfied and frustrated as he was unable to reach any sort of breakthrough. Eventually, Anki would come to the conclusion that he had reached his mortal limits, and he would volunteer himself as a religious sacrifice for Ormer, since he was unwilling to live an empty life any longer. But as he laid on the cross crucified by his fellow dark priest, Anki was granted a vision, given to him by none other than one of the four new gods, Nalbana the Endless, a vision about a prophesied man destined to usher in a new era of greatness for humanity. Frustrated and unwilling to let another bask in the glory of the gods, Anki ordered the priest to release him so that he could embark on a quest to uncover more about this prophesied figure. Eventually, Anki knew of this man's name, Lagarde. He was being held captive in the dungeons of fear and hunger, and so Anki embarked on his quest with one goal in mind: to uncover the truth about this prophesied one, Lagarde. Kahara. He originates from the Eastern Sanctuary, a bastard child left on his own at a very young age. Somehow, though, this poor soul found his way to these dungeons. In short, Kahara is not important. He is a nobody. Kahara was born with the endless soul, a force that drove him to constantly yearn for freedom and explore the depths of his creativity. Unfortunately, life in the capital of the Eastern Sanctuary, Jatia, would prove itself to be very harsh and unforgiving for Kahara, as he was abandoned and left to fend for himself by his parents when he was a child. To survive in the capital, a young Kahara was forced to make a difficult decision: to become a pickpocketer, a burglar, just to get by. Regardless, Kahara would abandon his previous career and join various mercenary armies, mastering the dirtiest tricks to stay alive. Eventually, he was taken in by a notorious veteran highwayman and became a member of his small band of criminals and ex-soldiers. Together, they traveled the lands, raiding and pillaging until Kahara found himself settling down in the kingdom of Rondon. Now in a new land, Kahara would make a living for himself by working in the kingdom's underworld, tempted by the promise of money and opportunity. During his stay on Rondon, Kahara would end up becoming romantically involved with a girl named Celeste, a prostitute who was trapped in an indebted servitude at one of the kingdom's brothels. His relationship with her is what prompted him to make the worst decision of his entire life: to delve into the dungeons of fear and hunger to search for a man by the name of Lagarde, as the money offered for his extraction would allow Kahara to free Celeste. Also, the fact that Celeste was pregnant with his child may have strengthened his determination to earn enough money to buy her freedom. Despite feeling a sense of unease about the task from the outset, Kahara nevertheless accepted it, as he was promised a handsome reward if he was successful. And then Kahara embarked into the dungeons of fear and hunger with one goal in mind: get into the dungeons to earn enough money to save his wife from a life of misery and provide for his unborn child by finding this man, his name was Lagarde or something, and get him out to get paid so he and his family could live happily ever after. Odd. Should the player choose to play as any of the four, they will have to decide on a couple of things along the way. Before you get control of your character, the player must go through a mini text adventure. To decide parts of the character's backstory, earning said character different skills and equipment depending on the player's choices during said text adventure. For an example, after Anki's life was spared on his subsequent defeat at the hand of his sister, he gets a choice. Either accept his defeat and be thrown into a pit where he will learn to communicate with the vermins and the insects, or grab his knife and stabbing his sister in the back, winning him the duel and getting him on the Dark Priest's good side, where they will teach him how to resurrect the dead. Ragnvalder could choose to take part in the corpse cannibalizing his crew are doing to survive, or he could resist the temptation and stay hungry, earning him either devour to eat away at the dead bodies to stay full, or bloodlust to get even more powerful in battle. Percy could choose to either study defensively or offensively, drastically changing her fighting style, and Kahara could live an honest life, earning him silver in the process, or he could start stealing, picking up lockpicking along the way. Just gonna go ahead and put 4 green marks on the actual choices of the backstories. And now your real adventure can truly begin. But before we get to the heart of the action, I would like to share a little story with you all really quick. It wouldn't take long. This story is called The Tale of Pocket Cat. It was a rainy day in the countryside, just north from the forest of Marwood. William, the wildest child known in the town, would stare at the raindrops behind the window screen. His mother would warn him from going outside. During rain, decent boys would help their parents with various indoor tasks, of course. Rain brings forth all kinds of dangers, not otherwise known to the little boys, of course. Disregarding the warnings and without a worry in the world, William dashes through the bushes and ran deep into the Marwood forest. In the heart of the forest, all wet from the rain, William heard slight panting noises from the overgrown grotto nearby. Cautiously, William peeked through the leaves. He would not believe his eyes. How could he? Especially when he saw a finely dressed cat standing on 2 feet. He was even twice as tall as William's father would be. The cat's back was facing William. Its hand was moving swiftly inside its pocket, while its 2 big yellow eyes gleamed inside a pearled bag in great excitement. Suddenly, the hand movement came to a halt. Even if William was well hidden behind the leaves, slowly the cat turned its eyes toward him. In terror, William ran as fast as he could towards his home. The 2 glowing yellow eyes of the cat hunted him all the way to his home gates. His mother was there to meet him by the front door. "So you just had to go to the woods, did you?" said his mother. "You saw something you shouldn't have, right?" questioned his mother. "And how do I know this?" William's mother would go inside to get a little parcel with decorated wrapping. This appeared on the front door just before you came. It was directed to young Master William. Slowly, William unwrapped the decorated paper with small mouse prints on it. Inside the parcel, there was catnip. After going through the text adventure, the character will finally enter the dungeon to start the search. As you enter, you find a dead horse and some barrels nearby. Ooh, loot! Looking back, you realize that for some reason you are trapped, for there is a huge mist covering the way back, preventing anyone from leaving. But as soon you will discover not from entering, as an ear-scratching sound of a bunch of bloodthirsty hound dogs fills the air. You panic, and then you're quickly chased down by some guard dogs. You fail to escape and thrown into your first encounter, where you will die. These dogs hit way too hard, you're outnumbered, and you just started. This right here will set the pattern for the rest of the game. For the best way to survive the fight is not to engage in one, for the enemies contained within the borders of this dungeon are not to be fucked with, and it could get worse depending on your character of choice. Darcy doesn't take much damage, and her knight training allows her to move twice per turn, but she does have to risk getting hit a bunch of times to set all of that up. Kahara doesn't deal much damage, nor does he take it all that well, but a life as a lowly mercenary taught him how to escape tough fights and to easily get into harder to get to areas. Anki's frail introvert body betrays him hard, as he cannot take a hit to save his life, nor does his damage even tickles. But the dark priest he grew up around taught him a thing or two on how to resurrect the dead to act as your meat shields, compensating for your weak physique, and cast magic at the cost of your sanity, compensating for his damage. And Ragnvaldr's harsh outlander upbringing, combined with his bloody eyes filled and fueled by absolute rage from the loss of his family and friends, resulting in him hitting like a truck, making quick work and tearing apart anything that stands in his way, even being able to stand toe-to-toe with the scary guards that will make the other three run, of course sacrificing all the utility of the other three in exchange for pure power. But even with all that, I don't know how useful it is to be this good at fighting when said fighting is not a very good idea. The loot is not worth it. You're unlikely to win any encounter you face, and the ones you do win will leave you bruised and beaten, with healing items being a rare commodity in this game. And worst of all, this could happen. Yes, you can lose your precious limbs permanently, and here is where you will learn about the game's main mechanic, the limbs system. During any fights, you will not be simply targeting your opponent, but their specific limbs, leading you to make various decisions on how you want to handle any given fight. Hitting the head from the start usually results in an automatic win, but good luck hitting that head with its 90% evasion chance thing. For unless you disable both of your opponent's legs, in which way they lose their balance, making it easier to hit their head, trying to go to the head from the start will be a high risk, high reward gander that, if missed, will leave you wide open for enemy attacks. So if you're fighting any enemy like the guard, it might be wise to deal with their giant freaking cleaver that can saw off all your limbs. Taking out the arms usually disable their most dangerous attack, but if all else fails, you can always go for the torso. Easy to hit, results in a KO just like the head, but usually boosting the most amount of health out of all the body parts. And do you want to hear something funny? The game never teaches you jack about any of this. No tutorials, no hints, not even a pop-up sign, leaving you to discover things through good and old trial and error. What that means is that you will be spending most of your playtime in the death screen. You will get smashed to bits by an armor guard, you will get your skin ripped off by an anthropomorphic lizard, you will be crushed by a floating head, suffocated by a giant fish, sucked through the ground by a black witch, getting every limb of your body magically teleported away by a dancing yellow bastard, and of course being beaten and taken to the dungeon cell where you will drop the soap, for the lack of a better word.
Come over here and kiss me on my hot mouth. I'm feeling romantical.
But after dying and dying and dying once more, you finally figure out what you're doing. Just try to survive and never forget the golden rule: it can always get worse. Lost an arm so can't hold shields or big weapons anymore? Well, could be worse. Lost both arms so can't hold anything at all? Well, motherfucker, ever heard about magic? Lost a leg and now you can't run? Well, you still have the other one, don't you? Lost your legs and now you have to crawl? Well, it can always get worse. It can always get worse. It can always get worse. At least I'm not bleeding or poisoned or infected. Heck, at least I don't have a stomach worm, and I'm not mind controlled, stunned with tentacles, or losing my mind from a lack of tobacco, alcohol, or opium. Oh yeah, you heard me right. Of the two main meters you have to keep track of during the game, food is very self-explanatory. Anything outside of rotten meat will do the trick, but mind is a completely different story. You'll need anything you can get your hand on to forget your terrible situation, even if only for a little bit. I'm talking alcohol, elixirs, tobacco, opium, and everything in between. Fear and hunger, do drugs, live your life. And that's not even speaking about fears. Every character has something they're scared of, and those fears will be randomly chosen during the beginning of the game. You have stuff like necrophobia, fear of the undead, phasmophobia, fear of ghosts and ghastly figures, rhabdophobia, fear of magic and otherworldly powers, erotophobia, fear of sex and genitals, zoophobia, fear of animals and beasts, and so on and so forth. Or in a particular instance, having your sanity drop to 0 will give you the ever so awful status panophobia, fear of everything. But what happens if you're afraid of something, you might ask? Well, if you're fighting something that you're afraid of, your attacks will do 50% less damage, their attack will do 50% more damage, and you will get 50% less evasions on all of their attacks. Basically, you're fucked. So, let's start avoiding that, shall we? And does the game tell you any of this? Yes it does actually. Halfway through the game on a random table. But you know what? At the very least, I'm not blind. Oh no, this is not a black screen. This is just how the game goes if you lose both your eyes. But you know what? Even without that, I'm satisfied. At least I'm not being dragged to a cell and getting my ass. No. Is that anus bleeding? So, just no matter what, you keep going. And going is what you're gonna be doing. Because at the entrance, we are just greeted by our first path branch. For there are two ways of entering the dungeon, giving us our first yellow marks for who went where. Of these two, we have the main entrance, literally named the entrance, and the back door leading to the basement. Trying both, you quickly realize that you're intended to go through the back door, for it possesses far more manageable enemies with those tentacle things. Well, by manageable at least compared to the guards of the entrance. Is that a demonic circle? Stuff for later, I guess. Descending down the basement staircase at level 1, you will encounter your first proper enemy, dogs not included. The Manibas. These things come from something called the green hue. No gods, you can take it from here. The Manibas come from something called the green hue. Even we don't know their true purpose. They manifest around sickness and death. They're nothing but carcass. While just seeming like barely sentient parasites at first, talking to them does reveal that they possess some form of intelligence. You stop. There is no need for killing. As the Maniba floats around mysteriously, you feel as if your question is being answered inside your head. The Maniba seem to suggest that it needs to absorb your life force. It's nothing personal. Dealing with this thing isn't the worst thing in the world. All its limbs go down by one hit, and none of its attacks cut off any of your limbs, or immediately one-shot you for that matter. And if you even manage to get a lucky hit on the head, it's an automatic KO. But even with that being said, it's still not advised to get into a fight with these things. There is too many of them. Their loot doesn't even slightly make up for the damage you'll be forced to use your ever so dwindling healing items on, and they could just infect you with a stomach ward that will make your hunger go twice as fast. Actually, before we go on, now that we're on the subject, do you know when does the game ever bother to go about status conditions? Like, I don't know, this stomach worm you just have in your body? Well, was in the beginning of the game. Good. But where, you might ask? In the beginning of the main entrance. The very same entrance that the game heavily discourages you from entering. Continuing to explore the area, your attention is quickly drawn to a weirdly ominous door. Trying to come closer, you'll be starting to hear something from inside your head, and it says, "Come find me. Let the blood flow." Man, does everything in this place have telepathy? Despite your best efforts, the door doesn't seem to budge. It even looks more reinforced than other doors you've seen around here. Taking a closer look to examine it, it reveals a crow-shaped emblem where its keyhole should be. I have no idea what that means. Woo! Loot! What?
What the hell was that?
And here is where the game introduces its second major mechanic, randomness. 90% of all loot drops in this game are randomized, meaning that if you got a good item and then proceeded to become the guard's bottom bitch, you are not guaranteed the same item in any subsequent playthrough. And that goes double for coin flips. Every armor, weapon, treasure chest to open will force you into a coin flip. Success will result in an item, while failure will result in an empty find, or a crappy item in case of chests. This randomness even extends to the combat, where some enemies will provide you with a coin flip attack. Get it right and you dodge the attack. Get it wrong and you get hit by a devastating blow. The dogs will eat you, the guards will wail on you, and some will even insta-kill you. And while you might think that this will result in the battles being completely dependent on luck, there are actually ways to get around these RNG mechanics. First of all, you will be given 2 lucky coins at the beginning of the game, and you can acquire more during your playthrough. Using those lucky coins via pressing shift will allow you to flip 2 coins instead of 1, but you wouldn't be blamed for not knowing that, as the game never speaks a word about this. And as for the combat coin flips, guarding will automatically count as if you pass the coin flip. This is further helped by the hints your opponent usually gives you, for these attacks will never come out of nowhere. Usually your opponent will provide you with a subtle indication that there is about to perform a coin flip attack. And again, the game doesn't teach you any of this. I swear, this is a good game. Continuing to move down your path, your character will be sucked through the ground by an unknown figure. Okay, this right here is its whole thing. So I'll just put a green mark in here and get back to it later, okay? Okay. After escaping from wherever that was, you continue through the basement to level 2, passing by a skeleton on your way. Kahara, Darcy, and Ragnvalder will ignore that thing, but Anki will immediately start resurrecting it while shouting, "Meat shield!" Passing by a mini graveyard, the people who are buried here are a combination of guard, knight, and some mages thrown in the mix. Also, there's another thing that's about this graveyard that greatly pisses me off, but get to that when we get to that. Not quite a mark, but just a note for myself for later. Passing by the graves, you stumble upon your next obstacle, the Iron Shakespeare. No gods, you know what to do. As things started to succumb to chaos in the dungeons of fear and hunger, he was sent from the kingdom of Rondon for aid. In short time, he too lost his mind. Now he tries to guard the area to his last breath from anyone who sets foot in this fortress. The Iron Shakespeare's giant metallic looking thing with clobbers for hand, and he can literally combust said clobbers at will. He have what seems like infinite health, your weapons barely leave a scratch on his armor, and worst of all, his loot is worthless. For upon looting your body, you'll be rewarded with a key that allow you access to a very strong weapon. It's just too bad that this weapon's accuracy is so bad it can't hit anything at all. But this can get even dumber, for if you're playing as Kahara the mercenary, you can acquire an ability in your text adventure called Steal. For you see, this ability, as the name suggests, will allow you to steal items from your opponent, but it must be during combat, and the enemy must still be alive for the ability to work. Cause for some unfathomable reason, looting an enemy while they're still alive gives you different stuff from looting them while they're dead. Guess some items just disappear if their holder smoked. Using Steal, the Iron Shakespeare will grant you one of two items, either Quill, the most useless item in the game, or an empty scroll, the most overpowered item in the entire game. Cause, for you see, for some reason writing "Oh Lord give blank" will instead provide you with said blank. Want to get some food? Oh Lord give food. Want to get some weapon? Oh Lord give weapon. Want to learn magic? Oh Lord teach magic. It's simply absurd, but it's still not worth it. So, what did we learn? Do not fight the Iron Shakespeare. It's not worth it in so many levels. And funnily enough, the game seems to know that. The area is designed in such a way that makes it extremely easy to avoid fighting this thing. He is so large that he gets stuck on everything, and his attention span is that of the average glue sniffer. So I can't stress this enough. He goes left, you goes right. Speaking of, on your left you will find a bed. Beds are the main way of saving your progress in Fear and Hunger, and the first one is free. Oh yeah, I said free, for this game have a charming way of going about saving. You see, just like we mentioned with the coin flip system, you will need to flip for saving as well.
Oh god, it just hit me. I'm gonna be playing Undertale this whole time.
One thing to know about this bed, that it is gonna be free for only once. Wait, what happens if I try that again? What the fuck? Going to the right, you'll find yourself in a room filled with valuable armor and weapons. Also, you'll be finding a wounded man laying injured to the left. Hold it. Just hold it right there. You are sane, I gather. Even if I may seem winded and wounded, I can still pack a deadly blow or two. So don't get any ideas. What exactly? I am Sir Seymour, a knight from the kingdom of Rondon. Meet Sir Seymour, a person of whom I'm 70% sure was only named Seymour because he wields a claymore. Sir Seymour is the first sane human you'll encounter during your dungeon crawl, provided you took the back door, that is. Seymour is immediately cautious of you from first sight, telling you to keep your distance as he knows that the dungeons take its toll on those who step foot in it. Talking to him reveals that he's a knight from the kingdom of Rondon, sent to these dungeons accompanied by 3 other party members. Their mission: find and rescue a man by the name of Captain Rodemir. But during their adventure, they were ambushed by the horrors of the dungeon, resulting in the crew splitting apart and scattering all around the dungeon. All alone, Sir Seymour was attacked by a scarab. Although he managed to kill it, it seemed that the scarab gave him as much as he gave it. Now his current plan is to regroup with their party leader, Lord Buckman. But if you want, you can attempt to attack and kill Sir Simon. He is a really difficult fight at this point of the game, but upon killing him, you will be rewarded with the Claymore, one of the best weapons of the whole game, but it's obviously not recommended if you want to do his quest. The meeting of Sir Simon will start another branching path in the timeline, although this is more of a side quest than anything else. Going to the next room, you find yourself in the dungeon's prison, level 3. It's bleak but not bleaker than anything else in this dingy forsaken place. This place is infested with guards who you should avoid at all costs, least you literally want to pay an arm and a leg. But you will always realize the abundance of these flying creatures. They go by the winged gnomes. No gods. The cave gnomes are diminutive winged gnome-like beings. They fly around attacking anything in sight for food. Safe to say that if they are here, their mother won't be much further. Going through the cells, you find out the fate of those who met their end in these dungeons, but ones that did not have the time to wither into skeletons. Those are the humans whose physical and mental fortitude could not handle the ever-pressing darkness. Simply, they lost their minds. While these things don't hit very hard, they can continue attacking even after being decapitated. And even if you knew that in advance and decided to go for the torso, they get an extra turn to attack after dying. But worst of all, their attacks can inflict what is by far the worst status condition in this game: infection. When a character limb gets infected, either by a scratch, a bite, or even just an exposed nail who you had no way of knowing that was even there to begin with, the character limb will get infected. You see, infections does one thing and one thing only. It will kill you within 7 loading screens, and you'll have no way of knowing that before dying to it at least once, because the game doesn't teach you how to handle status conditions right away. All the information about the status conditions and fears and the enemies are written in various books across the dungeon. Some will be guaranteed fine, while others will be left to random chance while looting a bookshelf. And in these bookshelves that most of the information about the game reside. And not just gameplay, but also lore and the history of the world. Yes, and again I repeat, you heard me right. Whether you understand the story of this game or not is left to absolute chance.
What the fuck?
And one of these books is the Book of Status Conditions. And before reading this book, you can realize that some are obvious. Bleeding can be bandaged via a cloth fragment found in barrels or torn from beds. Blue herbs and vials will heal you, while exploding vials will explode. But others are not so obvious. So you either have to try every sketchy looking potion you find on yourself, of course wielding the risk of being poisoned or worse in the process, or you can go around searching for these books to teach you how to play the game. Bleeding can be bandaged with a cloth fragment, infection can be healed with a green herb, blue herbs and vial heal you, red vials can be used to melt locks or blind targets. Stomach wars are taken away via a warm juice, but a warm juice will poison you, and a poison can be healed with a white vial, and so on and so forth and so forth. So just up to your luck. Upon defeating a ghoul, just like a skeleton, Kahara, Darcy and Raghavada will just pass it by, while Anki will resurrected for another meat shield. Looking around the place, you find some sets of paper. It actually looks like diaries more than anything else. Okay, let's see what we got in here. Captain Rudemir. Huh. That's the name of the guy Sir Simon was here for. 16th of January, 1590. Torture once again went too far with his wicked methods. The prisoner was but a child, but already he had gone through so much torture that he shit himself more than he bled. I must say, I'm afraid of torture to a certain degree. Sometimes I think I would do this world justice if I just offed him with my blade. Very few know this, but Torture used to be a famed holy knight of Rondon back in the day. He was able to achieve great fame at a very young age, but during our holy campaign against Eastern terrorists at the capital, he was captured. Everyone presumed he was dead. He died as a war hero. No, he should have died as a war hero. But 5 years later, when we occupied the eastern capital by the name of Jatia, we also found what was left of Torture. He was but a shadow of his former self, a disfigured hunchback man with barely any resemblance to the great hero so many adored. I am sure during those 5 years he went through so many methods of torture that he now puts to use himself. Just to honor the memory of Torture the White, I let this monster live today, although I see great contradiction in my words here. So originally when I was making this video, I had intended for this to be a one long extended video, but oh my god, this has gotten out of control fast. So in the face of a 250 page script, I had decided to split this thing into parts. Heck, splitting this thing into parts allowed me to change things up as they come. Also, on the off chance that people don't like this, I could just dedicate my time to something else. So I can't read your thoughts about this whole thing right now, and if it all goes according to plan, I'll be seeing you all very, very soon.